Isn't it? Let's bring in our political panel now, our politicians panel now. Joining us from Canberra, Tim Wilson, the Liberal member for Goldstein, and Matt Thistlewaite, the Labor member for Kingsford Smith. Thanks for both joining us together. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Hey, let's see if we can start off on a note. I was thinking of one note. We might even get two notes here of bipartisan agreement. So I'll go to you first, Matt. Do you think this idea of an Inspector General for the Murray-Darling Basin plan makes a lot of sense?
Well, it's only been announced today, Chris, and we'll certainly give it serious consideration. But what a disaster this government's made of.
You've got to just check all the details, etc., etc. But, you know, on the basis of what we know, it sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Something Labor could support?
Well, it sounds like it has some merit, but we do need to see the details. But what I do know is that this government's made a disaster of the Murray-Darling. We've seen other independent reports that have pointed to alleged corruption in terms of buybacks and the like. You've got officials in the New South Wales government that are being investigated and prosecuted by ICAC for breaches of the law. The Murray-Darling suffering disastrously from climate change effects, yet this government has no approach on a national level to tackle climate change. So they've really made a disaster of the Murray-Darling.
There we go.
States like yours,
here I was hoping for some
Chris, your home state of
bipartisanship.
South Australia are suffering.
Here I was hoping for
I think
bipartisanship. You don't think the drought might have something to do with the drought? We've always had droughts. So they're not doing anything on climate change. They've signed up to Paris. You and Labor used to say Paris was the bee's knees.
Well, they're not taking strong enough action on climate change. That's well known by the Australian public. After 6 years in government, Chris, they still don't have a national approach to energy and driving down emissions in this country. And as a result, carbon emissions in Australia are going up. And all the climate scientists tell us that you're going to get extreme weather events like droughts and others that have effects on rural communities.
Well, you know,
Chris,
I'll come to you in a second, Tim, but firstly, of course, Australia's not going to change the climate. Anybody with an IQ above room temperature knows that. Secondly, we've signed up to Paris. We have the renewable energy target and a whole range of other climate policies. But I'm just a bit disappointed that we couldn't just get a straight note of bipartisan agreement on something as logical as an Inspector General for the Murray-Darling Basin plan. So I want to come to you, Tim, on a Labor message from yesterday. I'm hoping maybe the coalition side can give just straightforward, with the normal provisos, as Matt said, about seeing the detail and whatever, but what Tony Sheldon said in the Senate yesterday about the need to try and make sure the tech giants, the multinational tech titans, Facebook, Google, Uber, Amazon, we need to make sure that they're paying appropriate tax in this country. That's something we could all agree on and work towards in a bipartisan fashion, isn't it?
Well, I think the answer broadly is yes. I mean, exactly as you've outlined, there are always caveats around that, and the government has already taken a series of measures precisely to do that, to actually impose tax on multinationals if they're not paying a proportionate amount of their revenue base in taxation. We introduced new measures in the last parliament to tackle it. But I mean, what we just heard from Matt was he wanted to say yes, but couldn't. He had to go on this audition almost that he could sit on the front bench and throw punches at the government. But when it comes down to it, the idea of the Inspector General is a good one. It's necessary to build a sense of confidence because we know this is an area that the federal government has exclusive control over. We have to work with the states, and everything we can do to build confidence in our river management systems around environmental protection is a critical part of, I think, what Australians want us to do as part of cooperatively working with the states to deliver the best economic and environmental outcome for Australians.
Well, OK, that is good news. We can all agree then there is a general bipartisan agreement. Both sides of the aisle can look at policing the Murray-Darling Basin plan as something that's generally a good idea, and likewise, if we can increase efforts to make sure that there's appropriate tax paid by these tech titans, that also would be a good thing. I'm wondering on another front, this debate about Newstart, the Newstart allowance continues, Matt, whether it should be increased and all the rest of it. But there's been a bit of a kerfuffle about the term dole bludgers. Now, of course, no one should be insinuating that everybody on the Newstart allowance is a dole bludger. But, I mean, this is Australia. We all know there are dole bludgers. We don't have to censor ourselves to that extent, do we? We can actually refer to dole bludgers in our political discussions, can't we?
Well, I think Channel 7 faced a backlash yesterday for using that term, Chris, and for good reason. And that's related to the fact that most people that are on Newstart are overwhelmingly over 55 years of age and are on Newstart because they've fallen out of the workforce, generally through no fault of their own. They might have been made redundant or they've lost their job and they can't get back into the workforce because of their age. And I don't think that referring to people like that as dole bludgers is helpful at all. And a lot of these people...
Not all of them, Matt, but we all know there are some dole bludgers, and you've got to be realistic about it, especially when you're talking about compliance issues and all the rest of it.
Well, look, I'm not going to use that term. I think that most people that are on Newstart are genuinely trying to find work and get back into the workforce. And there's nothing more disheartening, Chris, than sitting with constituents, and I've done this on many occasions, that are in their 60s, that want to continue to work but have lost their job because they've been made redundant in the manufacturing sector or something like that in Australia, but want to get back into work. And to have those people living off $40 a day, struggling to make ends meet, when they've made a serious contribution to our economy and our nation, I think is disrespectful. And that's why Labor's been calling for a rise in the Newstart allowance for people like that.
Yeah, sure. Look, Tim, you'd agree with everything Matt said there about unemployed people, but honestly, are we getting so precious and pressured by the outrage machine in this country that you can't refer to dole bludgers or fat cats or whatever else? I mean, come on.
Well, of course you can, Chris, but that doesn't exempt you from the right to be criticised as well. I mean, some of the things that Matt just said, then I agree with. I mean, I want people who are no longer in employment to be able to get it, particularly if they've been working their whole adult life. But I also want to break the cycle of intergenerational welfare where people may be raised in a household where one or both parents is dependent on the welfare system, and then the next generation goes on to as well. So I think at every point what we actually want is the maximum number of Australians in jobs, self-supporting themselves and their families, because that's the foundation of a great country. Now, there'll always be some people who can work who choose not to, but I don't actually think that there's a huge number of people who are in that circumstance. I think most people are trying to do the right thing, and they're the people we should be encouraging, and for the others we have to make sure that they understand that there are significant... I mean, I've never understood it, Chris, frankly. The idea that we get one life and people will not seize the opportunity in the moment that's available to them to be able to go off and have something successful for themselves and to be able to live a life of purpose.
Tim, while I got you there, you've often been an advocate for freedom of speech, of course. So what are your thoughts about Raheem Kassam? Obviously, you've heard what he said tweeted about Nicola Sturgeon. He's also said that the Muslim faith is evil. He was raised a Muslim. Is Christina Keneally over the top, though, saying that on that basis he should be banned from the country?
Well, I mean, these are decisions for the minister to go through in terms of the Act and where there are appropriate characters. I mean, I think both comments are frankly pretty poor. But I mean, people should have the right to be able to ridicule religion if they want. I believe very strongly in that. I think the concern with some of the comments he made about Nicola Sturgeon is that they imply, you know, a violent acts are legitimate, but it doesn't incite people, I don't think, to do so. I think these are decisions that the minister's going to have to weigh up pretty carefully, but you've also got to weigh it up against the whole body. I mean, people can say two terrible things in their life, and it shouldn't automatically equate to a visa ban. And frankly, I mean, Christina Keneally is one of these people who is an outrage merchant and likes to parade around from time to time. And I've got to say, she did it all throughout the election, and so her credibility, I think, is diminished in this space. I think what actually matters is the substance of the individual, not on the person who's the outrage merchant.
Matt Thistlewaite, look, to one degree, the government sort of created a rod for its own back here because it banned Milo Yiannopoulos because of similar comments. But if you started banning every visiting person on their most outrageous tweet, we wouldn't have too many coming to this country.
We'd be deporting Van Batten.
Well, I think that this individual's got a bit more form, Chris, than a single outrageous tweet. And I certainly support.
Well, only that he's an arch conservative, an alt-right conservative.
But look, it's a trend of extremism, and whether they're extremists on the left or the right, I think that we need to scrutinise applications for visas for people like that, because they can promote division, disunity that can lead, I'm not saying that that's going to happen in this case, that can lead to violence within our community, and we want to try and avoid that. where we can and create a more harmonious society. And I think that the comments of this individual in the past could be in that vein of extremism, and we don't want to see that in our nation.
I've just never heard Christina Keneally complain about some of the Islamist hate preachers who have come out here in recent years.
Well, I'm sure that she's got a similar view on people on both sides of the spectrum that have extremist views, and I think that you need to take a fair and balanced approach when you do these sort of things in assessing these sort of visa applications, and try and avoid situations where people who can, in some circumstances, incite violence in our community should be avoided.
All right, well, thanks both for joining us. Appreciate that. Enjoy your last day at Parliament House for a while. Tim Wilson and Matt Thistlewaite.